On February 17th, 2021, I released my thoughts on Outlast 2, a 4-video series talking about issues and my disappointment with the developers and the game. A series made with 4 consecutive playthroughs to completion, leaving me with a grand total of 24 hours invested in the game. And I wanted to stop. I did not want to play Outlast 2 anymore. I was done. And then, the trailer that took the internet by storm was released. And after hearing about this upcoming game, my interest was piqued once again with the release of Resident Evil Village. My thoughts on Resident Evil 8. Let me tell you what I'm not going to do. This is not going to be a detailed analysis. This is not going to be an in-depth review. It is certainly not going to be an appeal to one side of the coin or another. I am not going to compare this game to subsequent Resident Evil games, and I am not going to do what seemingly every reviewer has done and say this game is Resident Evil 4 and 7 met in the middle. These are simply my thoughts. You know, I really love the internet sometimes. At times they reignite my hope in humanity, and in the same breath just completely make me regret staying on this planet with the rest of the species. And oh boy, this game. There are some things to talk about here. Apparently, so many things that 9 people were able to spend about 9 hours talking about most of its issues. Though not all. I believe there's only so much that you can get to in freeform discussion. However, it was nice to see that I wasn't the only one who saw these issues. So with that, it's my turn now. To keep up with my standard of organization, I am going to split this into sections starting with the story and my introduction, then attacking each lord in their respective levels and finishing with Miranda, then tackling some spicy reviews, and then finally some closing thoughts and maybe a fun little exercise at the end. But first, if you could indulge me for a moment, I would like to go over this game's trailers. Now, many of you already know, but leading up to its launch, Capcom released the Resident Evil Village announcement trailer, grabbing some attention. And then a few months later, they released the 3rd trailer and the internet exploded. Now, Bowiehunter, what exactly was it that made the internet respond so incredibly much just from this trailer? Did it propose an interesting storyline, stunning visuals, interesting enemies, or some top-tier wow factor moments? No. They made a woman tall. But let's take a full look at what all of these trailers have to offer and what we could be led to expect from the game. Trailer 1 highlights the opening story and the local setting of the village. You're introduced to sounds of growling and the roof and floor being broken through. And next you see symbols, statues, gates, and the castle. Then the villagers, and it briefly shows Lady Dimitrescu sucking your blood from your hand, and then the Lycans, and it gives you 2 flashes of Heisenberg, and finishes with the "Wow, Chris shot Mia" scene. Trailer 2. You open with Ethan laying in the snow and be shown Ethan getting taken away by Chris's team. You hear the old lady's line again, more Lycans, opening story again, more villagers, and it ends on the castle. Trailer 3, the one everyone lost their shit about. This trailer focuses on Lady Dimitrescu, her daughters, and the castle. showing the turned servants, winged creatures flying around the castle, the daughters with the flies around them, a stone coffin, and ending with Heisenberg. Trailer 4 opens with a panning shot of the ceremony site, old lady talking about midnight moons and black wings. We then cut to Heisenberg dragging us, Louisa's house, the Lycans' den, making a heavy focus on Heisenberg and the Lycans, and then turning to Lady Dimitrescu and her daughters again. Another shot of her sucking your blood, villagers again escaping the burning house. Heisenberg saying Lycans and gentlemen. The first shot out of 4 trailers of the room with all of the lords. Freeze it! But it only plays enough for you to see Mother Miranda in the middle, Lady Dimitrescu, and Heisenberg. Why do you only see these 3? Because Miranda has her wings drawing attention to herself, Lady Dimitrescu is tall, Heisenberg is front and center. This clip plays for 3 seconds. You are not going to look at Donna and Moreau. Why? Because they're smaller and out of the way, almost hiding. Anyway, continue. We see the knife again, big lichen, the 4-legged lichen. You finally see Moreau in fish form. Well, his tail at least. Everyone saying Ethan Winters.
Ethan Winters.
Mr. Winter. Ethan Winters.
Ethan. Poor Ethan.
Ethan Winters. Welcome.
And then more Chris. And that's it. So in all 4 trailers, you barely see Moreau or Donna. And everything else was misleading. What kind of game could we have expected based on these trailers? Well, I wouldn't blame anyone for thinking something along the lines of Ethan goes to a village and helps the villagers fight off a vampire and bug people in the castle, and the leader of the werewolves, Heisenberg, while also fist-fighting Chris for killing Mia. And that's it. Let's have a little conversation about what the actual story is. And I'm not going to be reading from any wikis, this is just based on what I see on the screen. Because if it's on the screen, there is no doubt that it is canon. Now, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, allow me to show you a recap of Resident Evil 7's story, since this is a direct sequel.
Resident Evil 7 is the story of Ethan surviving a house of horrors, but once you complete the game and its DLC, you will get a sort of full story. Mia Winters and Alan Joni are transporting an E-Series bioweapon in the form of a little girl named Evelyn. Evelyn was created by the company Tensu, and they were transporting her with the interest of potentially selling the resource on the black market. The weapon itself took on a persona of a little girl, possibly by design, and had an established desire for family that could be manipulated. This allowed Mia to act as a mothering figure, which prevented her from being attacked by Evelyn and gave her influence over the weapon itself. Unfortunately, Evelyn managed to escape from the 2 Guardians during transport and caused massive damage to the civilians, workers, and the ship itself. The ship was torn in half and eventually washed up in Dulvey, Louisiana. The Dulvey plantation, inhabited by the quirky Baker family, are going about life as usual when Jack, the father in the family, finds both Mia and Evelyn. The family are concerned with looking out for them, but then strange things begin happening. Lucas is found unconscious, and upon investigation, Zoe finds that Marguerite is infected with some horrifying disease or sickness. Jack hurries to subdue her, but is quickly turned as well. Finally, Lucas is given the same treatment, and Zoe attempts to escape the estate. She finds Mia and the information that there is a cure for what is happening. Zoe then bides her time and waits for an opportunity to create the cure and escape the Baker estate. Emily infected the entire Baker family, similar to the people on the ship, with a psychotropic mold, and forced them to look out for her. His stranglehold was maintained with a form of mind control. In exchange for providing observations to a third party, Lucas was immunized against Evelyn's abilities and used his position to take advantage of other victims and put them in games he constructed. As time moved on, the Baker Mansion and surrounding buildings began to decay and rot along with the many victims the Evelyn-controlled family lured in. Each of the victims were toyed with and or murdered with the intention of adding them to the family, which amounted to the collective mold in the house. This was often enough for the molded to form, a hyper-evolved bacterium generated by Evelyn. They are similar to foot soldiers that solely operate according to Evelyn's wishes. As time moved on, Evelyn was separated from her regulation with her handlers, and this caused her to age rapidly. This didn't change her want and need for a family, which is then perpetually encouraged by her original family victims, which also resulted in Mia being manipulated into contacting Ethan Winters, her husband. Ethan believed his wife was missing for 3 years, and contact from her drove him to search her out in the Dulvey plantation. Exploring a seemingly abandoned house, Ethan finds Mia imprisoned in the basement. During their escape, Mia's infection takes her over and she openly attacks Ethan, forcing him to fight her until Jack knocks Ethan out. Ethan then spends his time in the Baker Mansion trying to survive each of the horrors brought on by Evelyn while uncovering the story that started it all. Zoe manages to get in contact with Ethan and inform him that there is a possibility of a cure. Ethan then defeats Jack, Marguerite, and Lucas Baker in their own areas while finding the 2 ingredients to the cure and then injects it, canonically, into Mia. That would be ending 1, leaving Zoe to her fate. Regardless of the player's choice, Mia ends up in the wrecked ship and searches for Ethan while experiencing visions of Evelyn, who refers to Mia as her mother. Eventually, Mia's memory is restored, revealing her history. After finding Ethan, Mia gives him a vial of Evelyn's genetic material. If Ethan cured Zoe, Mia succumbs to Evelyn's control and attacks Ethan, forcing him to kill her. If Ethan cured Mia, she resists her control long enough to seal Ethan out of the ship and save him. After leaving the shipwreck, Ethan discovers a hidden laboratory inside an abandoned salt mine. There, he learns that Evelyn is an E-series bioweapon capable of infecting people with a psychotropic mold that gives her control of her victims' minds, resulting in their insanity, superhuman regenerative abilities, and various mutations. Using the lab equipment and Evelyn's genetic material, Ethan synthesizes a toxin to kill her, and then proceeds through a series of tunnels that lead back to the Baker house. Evelyn assaults Ethan with hallucinations, but he overcomes them and injects Evelyn with the toxin, ending her facade and revealing her as an elderly woman in a wheelchair who's been rapidly aging since her escape. Evelyn mutates into a large monster, but aided by the arrival of a military squad, Ethan is able to defeat her. With the threat over, the squad and their leader, who identifies himself as Redfield, extract Ethan by a helicopter. The helicopter then flies away. It leaves behind the ruins of the Baker Mansion and reveals a variation of the Umbrella logo.
And that brings us to Resident Evil Village. Our story begins with Miranda, a member of a scientific team in her early life and a mother of 1 daughter in a small village in the southeastern European country of Romania, around the years of 1918 and 1920. Miranda unfortunately loses her daughter, Ava, to the Spanish flu or the influenza epidemic, a particularly deadly global pandemic caused by the H1N1 influenza A virus. Following her daughter's death, she wanders into a cave to die and accidentally discovers the megamycete and touches it, converting her from a human to an immortal bioweapon. Now aware of the megamycete's abilities, Miranda begins her experiments to attempt to resurrect her daughter via a vessel. Returning to the village, she implants the local villagers with mold from the megamycete to control and experiment on them, in hopes of locating a suitable vessel to host her daughter's resurrection via merging with a megamycete over the course of the next 100 years. At first, her experiments returned subpar results, turning a majority of the locals into lichens and killing the rest. However, in time she finds subjects that show more favorable results, prompting Miranda to keep them close to her, creating the 4 lords. Her experiments later gain the attention of Dr. Oswald Spencer, who becomes inspired by her efforts and moves forward to create the Umbrella Corporation with the goal of changing the world. Spencer, not seeing the experiments on the mold to be of much help in his endeavors, moves on to research a virus capable of mass infection, leaving Miranda and continuing his research in Africa. Miranda is then approached by members of the Tensu organization, saying they will assist her in her experiments. She provides them with a sample of the mold and her daughter's DNA, which is used to create the E-series bioweapon, Evelyn. The events of Resident Evil 7 unfold, and that brings us to Ethan and Mia Winters in this story, 3 years after the incident in Louisiana. After the defeat of Evelyn, Chris Redfield, now working for the BSAA, not Umbrella, has Ethan and Mia relocate to Romania. Later, Ethan and Mia have a child named Rose. Miranda learns of Rose and becomes convinced that she will be the perfect vessel for Ava's resurrection. Miranda then captures Mia and takes her place by shapeshifting to look and sound like Mia. Chris and his team learn of this and moves in to attempt to stop Miranda from kidnapping Rose. Unsure of whether Ethan is infected with Miranda's mold, Chris decides not to tell Ethan and has him knocked out and put on a transport along with Miranda's body and Rose. The transport gets attacked, Miranda escapes with Rose, and now Ethan has to get his daughter back. Miranda splits Rose into 4 flasks and gives each one to her 4 lords to guard until the ceremony. Now Ethan, upon entering the local village, meets a small group of surviving villagers, just in time for all of them to be killed. Next, he unlocks the castle and is caught and taken captive by Heisenberg and brought to the 4 lords and Miranda herself. When he wakes up, Dimitrescu and Heisenberg are arguing over who should get to kill him, and Miranda says that your fate is left in Heisenberg's hands. Heisenberg lets Ethan go, and after a lichen chase, Ethan escapes, goes to the castle, kills Lady Dimitrescu and her daughters, and retrieves one of the Rose flasks. He repeats this process with the other lords, and after defeating Heisenberg, Ethan is confronted by Miranda, who rips out his heart, effectively killing him. Now Chris moves in and clears out the village and rigs the Megamycete with explosives and goes to find Miranda, discovering her lab and Mia, who, after hearing that Ethan is dead, explains to Chris that Ethan is actually completely made out of mold thanks to Evelyn infecting him after Jack Baker kills him when he first arrived to the house in Louisiana. After a conversation with his inner Evelyn, Mold Man Ethan wakes up and kills Miranda and rescues Rose, but unfortunately his body begins to break down and disintegrate. Chris comes and helps him to the bridge and tells Ethan that Mia is alive, and Ethan gives Rose to Chris and tells him to get out as he takes the detonator and blows up the Megamycete. Chris and Mia escapes, Rose grows up, roll credits. Like I said, there are a lot of things to talk about with this game. This game severely suffers from subsequent playthroughs, so I will do my best to keep this in some semblance of structure and attack each point in as much of a chronological order as I can. But for now, let's hit this introduction. At present, I played the game about 6 times to completion, one of them being Village of Shadows, and my last run being modded and streamed. My very first playthrough ran about 8 hours, Village of Shadows running longer, and since then I started hitting 3.5 to 4 hour runs as I unlocked everything and don't need most of the treasure anymore, as I hit the max amount of money that I can carry. So why did I point out the specific setting of this game? Because apparently Capcom can't be bothered to get European voice actors, because somehow we all have American accents in a rural Romanian village now, I guess. I understand that a good portion of the voice actors were previous Resident Evil characters, But that doesn't mean anything for these characters. It doesn't improve them. It doesn't give them a pass if they're not great. And also not an argument for the missing European accents in Europe. It seems that Capcom is done with the Umbrella Corporation for their stories now, and we have moved on to the BSAA. Also, it seems that they really don't want to tell us that Mia worked for the Tensu organization, or even acknowledge that Tensu was the name of the organization that created Evelyn. It's very strange. Apparently, a fandom wiki got confused, saying that Mia was an operative for the Connections, a crime syndicate founded by Brandon Bailey. If this was information that was found in the game, I know I didn't see it. And I'll talk about this more when I start responding to reviewers. Fuck off with Rose being split into 4 flasks. I just don't believe you. If I go through the game pretending that's not a thing and treat the flasks as if they're like power cells for the chalice, it somehow makes more sense to me. Also, Rose, talk about an ugly ass baby. And if you're gonna tell me, but Bowie, if you do that, then it definitely makes sense that the chalice top becomes goop and Rose just materializes there, right? Then I'll tell you that makes just as much sense as Rose being inside of Miranda as you're shooting the shit out of her and pops out of the crumbling stone that is Miranda's remains, just completely fine. This sequence, this entire story is fucked. You want to do some storyline with vampires and werewolves and magic? Fine. You want to completely reboot Resident Evil and get away from the T-virus zombie stuff? Fine. That's fine. But do something fucking better than this. Maybe? It's obvious that we have very clearly defined sections of different horror in each of the lords. And I'm really noticing a pattern among horror games where they try to mix genres together in one mass game. House on the Hill did it, Resident Evil 7 did it, and now we're doing it again with this game. We have genres for a reason. You don't do everything in a story. It rarely works. There are times where it does, obviously. However, those are the exceptions. Not to mention, those take a lot of work. You don't have Paranormal Activity and throw in Saw 10 minutes later and just leave it saying, it'll be fine. It doesn't work that way. Just as you don't have vampires and then Jaws. There's a lot to talk about and a lot of time needed to talk about it. So let's start. Want to know something funny? I did a little test to see how bearable the game would be without Ethan talking, and in the opening scene, when Mia Miranda gets capped, if the voice volume is turned off, you don't hear any gunshots. So for whatever reason, in the opening scene, they put the gunfire sound effects on the voice audio track. Mia! Whoops. How are you Capcom and you do that? I asked the same question in a server and someone said, well, they did Resident Evil 7. And all I could say was, fucking fair, my dude. Also, this washboard of a dude either is going through or had military training based on the way he delivers this line.
It's just finding you in Louisiana, the pregnancy, Chris moving us here, military training, it all happened so fast, you know?
You know what? I'm gonna hand this one over to Corporal Hunter.
I swear to God, why I let you talk me into this is a complete mystery to me. It's my day off, you fuck. You told me to stand over there. That's a patch of poison ivy. Fucking whatever. I don't know anyone who sees someone get shot, their wife, no less, who has gone through military training and reacts that fucking slowly. There's no get the fuck down. There's no get away from the window. There's no flipping the table over for cover. As soon as you hear that bullet, that gunshot, crash through the window and see your wife get shot in the shoulder. If that's the result of your military training, I think I'll stay a civilian. Thank you very much. Now let's touch on that, Ethan. You mentioned that you are/were getting military training. Military training in what? Because funny thing, there's a lot of things that are covered in military training, and Ethan displayed none of them. The only time that I saw something that could have been considered to be from military training was his little takedown throw over the shoulder.
What the fuck are they doing here?
Get off of me! Stay the fuck down!
That he immediately got reversed on. Good job. If you threw in that line solely to try and explain Ethan having any kind of proficiency, motherfucker, in weapons handling, guess what? You don't need to do that. Also, just throwing out military training to explain competency and weapons handling, that's not how it works. Being in the military doesn't magically make you better at reloading a weapon. That's repetition and practice that does that. And you don't always get that in basic training, because there are a million other things that your instructors have to teach you. Am I saying that the training that Ethan gets is or is comparable to basic training? No. I'm saying that the scale of training that you get from the military is much more than just weapons handling. Also, how the fuck do you go through military training and you still move that fucking slowly?
So that bit about the military training, you might do better with it not being there in the first place. Where's Ethan's stapled hand? I want to see that motherfucker. Whoa, okay. You're just gonna bite the hand that got stapled back on. Alright. It's fine, we don't need this hand anyway, I guess. Capcom really doesn't want us to have a fully functioning hand anymore. Also, is that as much as you're gonna scream about that? I was expecting like this fucking blood-curdling scream from you after getting half of your hand bitten off. Why did the Lycans stop attacking us and leave when they heard the bells? Why does Miranda fluctuate between wanting us dead and needing us alive to get rid of the lords for her? So some of the enemies that you'll encounter throughout the village are roped in by invisible walls. And what I mean is, they spawn in specific areas of the village and they cannot leave that specific area. If you manage to get them to swing at you just outside of their little barrier, they'll stop chasing you and return to their arena. Oh, thank God, the villager scene. Now I got something concrete to talk about. Welcome to one of a total of 2 interesting scenes in this entire game. This will start a pattern, don't you worry. You have this group of people and you sit down and listen to the drunk dude talk. And you'll most likely be thinking, damn, are we gonna spend some time with some other people after being alone in Resident Evil 7? Alright, I'm all for this. And I know I was getting rather excited to see potentially some character development between all of these people. Maybe see the drunk dude open up a little bit, maybe actually help everyone, join in on a prayer at the end, see the invalid be extremely useful after he heals, find out what happens to Louisa's husband, though you do that anyway in a kind of lackluster way. Or they could all die immediately after you meet them, have another illusion of choice sequence, and have Ethan drive through a brick wall. Yeah, I think that second option was definitely the more reasonable. What the fuck, Capcom? Why? Why did you set up all of these people like this just to do absolutely nothing with them? You would have been better off not having them in the first place. You know why? By introducing them here in the way that you did, have us be invested in them, make us think you'll actually do something with this, and then just straight up do nothing with them, shows that you're either lazy and didn't want to commit, or, far more malicious, you wanted to wave a flag in our faces, saying, see, we can write things, and then go right back to your story. Make the mistake of saying that I'm wrong. I would have thought that the obvious solution to fix this scene would have either been to not fucking kill everyone, or not have them be there to begin with, but fuck me, I guess I learn something new every day, don't I? No, seriously, I can justify this. Why the fuck did we come over here? You might say, because Ethan needs to find other survivors, and I forgive you for thinking that. No, we went there because we need a stone thingy to open the gates to Castle Dimitrescu that Louisa has in a box outside for some reason. Why does Louisa have what is essentially a key to the castle? And speaking of the castle, it's castle time. But we will have to look at that in the next video. I am trying to keep these at reasonable lengths for once, so thank you, and I will see you then.